from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.
At the legislature today, senators begin to focus in on the state's $4 billion budget as they wait for delegates to approve some major pieces of legislation like charter schools and campaign finance reform. The West Virginia Schools for the Deaf and Blind will be eligible for funding from the School Building Authority for badly needed improvements under a bill passed by the Senate Finance Committee today. And on our last episode of the season, Governor Earl Ray Tomblin joins us to look back on this session on the legislature today. Good evening, I'm Ashton Mara. Tomorrow is the final day of this 60-day legislative session, and lawmakers on both sides of the rotunda are rushing to get through as many pieces of legislation as possible. So far, members have approved more than 170 bills, and our guest this evening will be asked to consider them all. Joining us to discuss the progress of his legislative priorities and his thoughts on the legislation that's so far been approved by lawmakers is Governor Earl Ray Tomblin. Governor, thanks for joining us again.
I'm very pleased to be here, Ashton.
Let's start before we get to legislation with the trip you took this morning to see the landslide at Yeager Airport. You and Senators Manchin and Senator Capito went down there. What's the latest on that situation?
It's really was a sight to see all that mass of earth just crumbling and sliding down the hill. Probably at least 150 feet up the hill. It was all coming down. It had blocked the stream there on Keystone Road. The road is blocked out there. Has been blocked since yesterday. Most of the residents there have, the ones who wanted to go have already moved out there, either in hotels or staying with family members. And so, fortunately, no one has been hurt, but there was a church at the base of the slip that was completely destroyed there, another house, and today when we were there, water was very close to many of the homes along the Keystone Road there. So, it was something that they had contractors in there, trying to dip the dirt and mud out of the stream to relieve the water. So now no more of the homes will be damaged. But we have a real concern with the rain now starting and expected to last overnight, maybe into tomorrow, that more of the mud and debris will continue to wash down. And so there are people, the first responders are out there keeping an eye on things right now. But, fortunately, the FAA has been in and Yeager Airport is still open. There's no problems with flights coming and going, but it's just dealing with, the aftermath of the slip that came out there.
Well, we hope for the best for those families.
Absolutely.
Let's start with some legislation that you've already approved. You signed 3 pieces of legislation yesterday, and one was a controversial bill, the Coal Jobs and Safety Act of 2015. Right. You said earlier this week that you thought there were negotiations to be had on each side. Why'd you ultimately decide to sign that bill?
I was hoping the two sides, the United Mine Workers and the coal operators, the Coal Association, would be able to come to some compromise there. But the bill passed overwhelmingly in both houses. And basically, the thing I got to thinking about is, if the two groups can't get together, we got to worry about the safety of the miners in there. And the way the bill passed basically just allowed basically free movement of underground equipment while miners were inside the mine. And what I was able to do was work with both the Speaker and the House of Delegates to come up with a resolution directing the Board of Coal Miners Health and Safety to write rules, safety rules, on how the equipment should be moved, what the miners should be doing, the training they should have, so that we don't lose miners. Basically, had I vetoed the bill, it would have gone back upstairs and be just simply overridden. There would not be any direction to do the safety rules. So, my choice was to look out for the miners' safety. Ask the Board of Coal Miners Health and Safety to have the rules ready by the time this bill would kick in 90 days.
Another piece of legislation that got a lot of attention was the change of the prevailing wage. Originally introduced as a repeal, now it's just a scale back of $500,000 minimum in order to kick in for projects and a recalculation. Why sign that bill?
Well, I think that is one that also, the leadership of the legislature did work with those interested in preserving the prevailing wage. And there were some changes made there. Once again, those small projects in our small towns around the state will be exempt if the project is less than $500,000. And a lot of the small towns were really having problems trying to, get a sidewalk put in or a small project, because they did have to pay the prevailing wage. And it also recalculates how prevailing wage is determined around the state to allow Workforce West Virginia to be able to look at all the returns on the unemployment comp returns and see exactly what each particular craft is being paid and in what part of the state they're being paid there, so it could be more of a true prevailing wage. It was a controversial bill, but once again, it was one that it was pretty overwhelmingly passed, and I think it's a compromise. Everyone's not pleased with it, but that's the way the bill passed.
Some bills that have been approved this week that are headed your way. One of them is your bill, the Juvenile Justice Reform Bill. Can you tell us about that one?
Absolutely. We are going against the trend of the country with the amount of juveniles that we're taking in to custody in West Virginia, whether they're in state or out of state. And basically, we've worked with the Pew Foundation to come up with a way to do what a lot of states do, and that is to have services in the community for our young people. We've have so many students not really doing bad things, but being truant, being tardy, for various reasons. And basically what this bill will do will allow us to identify those kids who are starting down the wrong path, because once they go down the wrong path too far, a lot of times once they become in state custody, those are the kids that continue to go into our adult corrections population out there. So basically what we're hoping to do, catch these kids early, keep them at home, keep them in the community, and let them get the kind of help and guidance that they need, because so many of our children do not get the kind of guidance they need at home. But our slogan has pretty much been, let's keep the kids out of the courtroom and in the classroom, and that's the real approach we're taking, because I'm not convinced that locking kids up is the proper thing to do.
And on top of that, the importance of keeping those kids in school is that this will save the taxpayer dollars.
It'll save us millions of dollars, and we're just really hopeful that this is going to turn our trend around and keep the kids back in the classroom as opposed to sending them off to a reform school someplace.
Members today also approved a bill that will scale back the above-ground storage tank program that was passed last year. How do you feel about that legislation?
Well, the bill that was passed last year and the one that I introduced was really to protect the drinking water of the people of West Virginia. That was the main goal, and because the spill affected so many people, the bill continued to grow and really got a little bit unmanageable for our DEP. And I think that it does shrink some of the coverage of what tanks are coverage and so forth back to those areas of critical concern, which means that these tanks will be upstream from a public water intake, and also it had to be a certain size tank, or what particular chemical was in there. These are things we didn't know before the tank bill passed, and now we've had the reporting. But I think that we've hit the tanks that need to have the concern with. Those are the ones that, if they had a spill, would directly affect our public water systems, and that's one of those things we've all got to try to protect.
Governor, you're also going to be asked to sign a bill that would allow people to conceal carry in this state without a permit. How do you feel about that legislation?
I have not had a lot of calls of people asking for this bill. You can carry an open gun basically right now, but to have the concealed permit, I've not heard people complain about it's too expensive to get or too tough to get. But one of the things you've got to do, you've got to have some training, you've got to prove that you can handle a gun. There's background checks and different things that go on. And just to open it up where anybody can carry a concealed weapon, causes a lot of people a lot of concern. And we've got lots of calls, people that would like to see this bill vetoed. And it's one, I think the system we got is working pretty good right now. even though there's a lot of guns in the hands of people that don't have them now. But just to say, and I know the bill started out allowing anyone 18 or older to carry one, and I'm not sure that that's the best thing to do for the people of this state.
Just quickly, who do you talk to when you decide whether to veto or sign these bills? What goes on in your office as you're making that decision?
Sure, it depends on the bill, of course, but the first people that gets, or first of all, let me say, we watch the bill as it goes through the two houses. We listen to the debate, the pros and cons of why we should or should not have this bill, and then my legal team gets on the bill once we receive it, once it's passed by both houses. They give me, first of all, they check for technical problems with the bill, meaning mistakes in the title or insufficient title or whatever, and go through the bill section by section, to give me their opinion. But in the meantime, we receive calls from our constituent service office is open every day. We get reports every day of how many people's call, whether they're for or against. And the final decision comes down to me, and I've got to take all those things into consideration to see if it's good public policy and it's good for the people of the state of West Virginia.
Okay, Governor Tomblin, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Ashton.
In the House today, members voted on the bill to amend the above-ground storage tank law. The bill decreases the number of these tanks from regulation by the Department of Environmental Protection. Also, as Liz McCormick reports, the vote on another major piece of legislation was delayed in the House, while a second one is confirmed dead for this session.
Senate Bill 14 is a bill that would create the Public Charter Schools Act of 2015. Public charter schools are like regular public schools, only the teachers and administrators of charter schools would not be under the control of the County Board of Education. This allows more flexibility in the classroom. The bill was the second one on third reading, but was moved to the end of the calendar to delay consideration. Senate Bill 541 is another controversial bill and would reform campaign finance, which would increase how much candidates can take from donors. Currently, a donor can give $1,000 per primary and $1,000 per general election. The bill would have allowed $2,700 per election cycle. The Senate passed an amendment that would require third-party donors to give their identities, but the House removed this amendment, angering many in the House and Senate. However, this bill was moved to the inactive calendar, and House Speaker Tim Armstead says the bill is likely dead. Senate Bill 423, amending the above-ground storage tanks law, was up for a vote.
The last day of session, I was sitting right up here while a bill passed through this body unanimously. There was a Senate bill that passed through that body unanimously. Obviously, with bipartisan support, it passed unanimously. There were members of industry and citizens groups came together to work out the details of that bill. One part of it that I particularly liked, the last part of the bill, it set up a review process. It's a commission called the Public Water Service Supply Study Commission, which had groups from legislature, groups from the executive branch, citizens group, industry that would, and it had a review process built in so we could see how the bill was working. We haven't let that process play out, and now we're already rolling back the progress that we made towards protecting people's water in this state.
The fact that this new administration in this body would come in here less than a year later and roll back all of the protections that we provided before we give the Secretary of the Department of Environmental Protection the ability to do his job. Well, I can say that I'm not surprised at any of you, but I am hugely disappointed.
I believe what we do today will be also bipartisan. And just across the building, when they passed this very bill, before we had made some amendments, it was bipartisan. 31-1. The very member of that body that was the primary sponsor of last year's legislation voted for this bill, as did other Kanawha County senators. There was only one person that voted against the bill over there. This is a good compromise. We made some good switching it from 5 years to 3 years for the inspection. I think everybody agree with that. Let's just pass this bill.
When I look at this bill, what it does, when we had the problem with the freedoms industry, as the gentleman from the 13th indicated earlier, that the freedoms industry tanks not only are regulated under this bill, but were regulated under previous law, and they failed to follow that law. And the DEP failed to catch that problem. Now, we're leaving the DEP with the same number of staff and expecting them to cover even more tanks. So I believe in this bill, what we've done is focus the DEP on tanks that are most important.
It has not abandoned any or lessened any restrictions on those tanks that are in zones of critical concern, and it is also focused on those tanks that are of some peripheral concern. What it hasn't done is focus resources that are limited on tanks that are of no concern. And that's what we're really focused on here today, is let's fix what we did without turning our back on those areas that really need a focus of our attention.
Senate Bill 423 passed 78 to 21. Speaker Armstead voted against the bill. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Liz McCormick in the House.
As we approach the end of this legislative session, lawmakers turn their attention more and more to the daunting task of balancing the state's budget. Members of the House approved their version late last night, sending it over to the Senate for approval today.
Engrossed committee substitute for House Bill 2016, the budget bill, first reading of the bill.
After receiving the House's version of the 2016 budget, senators voted to suspend the constitutional rule that a bill be read on 3 separate days to take immediate action on it. The clerk read the bill a first and second time, and Finance Chair Mike Hall stood to amend it, replacing the House's budget with the Senate's version completed earlier this week.
This committee substitute, if passed, we're rolling it into the budget bill that we'll send it back to them, and they probably will not concur, and they'll ask us to recede, and we won't concur with them, and they won't be happy and we won't be happy, and then we'll form a conference committee and we'll meet next week to resolve the conflicts between the two bills.
Yesterday, Governor Tomblin extended the legislative session through Wednesday, but limited lawmakers to only considering the budget. Hall says the process of appointing conferees and beginning negotiations over fiscal differences will begin over the weekend. Before approving the amendment on the floor today, though, Hall explained the Senate's budget provisions to members. It includes $27 million from the state's rainy day fund. The governor initially proposed taking $68 million from the fund, but because of better returns on investments and property tax increases, has since reduced his estimate to just $15 million.
The governor is not required to submit a balanced budget, although he did based upon certain factors. However, we are required as a legislature to present a balanced budget to the governor for his signature. The governor's balanced budget depended upon several measures passing, one-time reductions, and the use of rainy day funds. I won't go through the entire list of bills, but we've seen several of them on the floor relative to raising revenue to balance the budget. Some of those passed and some of those did not.
Hall explained lawmakers did not approve governor's bills containing nearly $16 million he relied on to balance his budget. Tomblin also proposed a reduction of $83 million from the base budget, many of those cuts to education and health and human services.
There were certain areas, people that we met with, and some of the senators came to us. We'd like to have covered everybody and done everything, but we did not. But primary care centers were improved a little bit, health-free clinics, family resource networks, the grants for the license for domestic violence.
Those were the same child and family services Tomblin proposed cutting in last year's budget, but lawmakers restored from the Greyhound Purse Fund in a special session. This year, Hall says the Senate and House both chose to keep the programs funded. Again, lawmakers have until Wednesday to approve the final 2016 budget. Senators passed 2 education bills on the floor today. House Bill 2005 allows for the alternative certification of teachers, and House Bill 2140 requires the State Board of Education work with county boards of education when they take over a county school system to build the leadership abilities of the local board members. If the state board intervenes in a county, they must review the local board annually. And after 5 years, if they find the local board members are still not ready to take back control, the state board must hold a public hearing to hear the concerns of the community. After that hearing, the board may only remain in the county for 3 additional years before another public hearing must be held. In an earlier Finance Committee meeting, senators approved another education-related bill that could have some major financial impact on the West Virginia schools for the deaf and blind. Located in Romney and Hampshire County, the schools are struggling to keep the buildings on their nearly 150-year-old campus suitable for not just education, but also to house children from across the state who attend the special programs. The last construction project on the campus occurred in the 1970s, but many of the original buildings are still standing. The school superintendent, Dr. Lynn Boyer, explained to the committee state code precludes the schools from applying for and receiving funding from the West Virginia School Building Authority, a state agency that typically matches funds for counties who need help paying for new construction or severe maintenance issues. The bill before the committee would change code and allow them to apply for SBA funds, but also exempt them from providing matching dollars since they are not able to propose a levy. The schools are not overseen by any county board of education, but instead by the state board, which receives no funding. Boyer explained to Senator Roman Prezioso the school's Educational Facilities Plan, or CEFP as she refers to it, has a large price tag for getting their buildings back into appropriate shape.
The SBA, I will say Mr. Sneed, Dave Sneed, feels very strongly that our campus and its buildings are in great need of financial support for their renovation and in some cases for new facilities to be built because it's not cost effective to renovate certain. And so currently we have our CEFP is, SBA is familiar with it. It currently is at the price of $42 million, I believe, done in 3 phases across the next 5 to 7 years. And that is with the first phase at $20 million.
The Finance Committee approved the bill to allow the schools to apply for SBA funding. Tomorrow is the final day for lawmakers to vote on and approve bills on the floor.
Is there objection, Chair? Here's none on this one.
Thanks to newly installed camera systems in the House and Senate chambers, citizens around the state can watch their lawmakers at work. The legislature began video streaming floor sessions on the internet this year. As Beth Voorhees reports, the new technology will make for some must-see TV.
Here they are, little silver boxes perched on ledges above the House and Senate. There's 5 of these in each chamber. Last fall, before the November election, then Democratic legislative leaders proposed video streaming floor sessions on the web. After the election, when it appeared he would preside over the Senate, Senator Bill Cole was asked to sign off on the $700,000 tab.
My first thought about it was, gee whiz, that's a lot of money. Maybe that's not money we need to spend. And then I got thinking about it. I said, you know what, these guys advance that for exactly the right reasons. It gives more of a transparency to what goes on in the House and what goes on in the Senate, and I think that's appropriate.
West Virginia Public Broadcasting was called in to advise the legislature on its new foray into video web streaming. Chuck Roberts, director of video production, saw the potential for something more.
The main thing for us here at 600 Capitol Street was a fiber link. That was the most important thing for us, getting video here to our studios and being able to transmit that across the whole state. So we partnered with Frontier to get a fiber link that was big enough to pipe HD video down it and bring it back here and use it on air.
The cameras are robotic, remotely controlled at the clerk's desk by the same staff member who controls each legislator's microphone. When a lawmaker is recognized to speak, the operator merely has to touch the senator or delegate's picture on a screen. That's when two cameras focus on the lawmaker's desk. Graphics with names, districts, and titles automatically appear. The system seems to put the viewer right in the middle of the action on the floor.
You can feel very disconnected if you're just at home and not a part of the process. And now people are going to be a part of it. They're going to see something goes on. They're going to agree. They're going to disagree. I bet they get on a telephone. I bet they start calling us. But that's wonderful.
As someone who's worked for the legislature today for almost 15 years now, there's limitations to what we were able to do in the past. We couldn't go anything past 2 o'clock each day shooting, and we couldn't cover public hearings because they're too early in the morning or when something else was going on. Now with this system, we just flip a switch through the fiber and it can be brought back here and recorded or put on live.
West Virginia Public Broadcasting was able to provide live coverage of public hearings this session thanks to the system in the House chamber. And now that we're all a little more confident about how it works, we're bringing back our final day coverage, providing a close-up look as the first regular session of the 82nd Legislature gavels out. For West Virginia Public Broadcasting, I'm Beth Voorhees.
You can tune in to our final day coverage tomorrow morning beginning at 11 on WVPB2 or online at wvpublic.org. I'm Ashton Mara. This concludes our nightly coverage of this legislative session. We'll be back next January with all of the news from the second regular session of the 82nd Legislature. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following:
West Virginia University, online at wvu.edu. The High Technology Foundation, headquartered at the I-79 Technology Park in Fairmont, online at wvhtf.org.